This is the Glenn Beck Program.
Hello, America. Welcome to the Glenn Beck Program and The Blaze, the network you are building. I'm Pat Gray. Glenn's out today for a very good reason. A little over a week ago, we lost a true American hero. Chris Kyle, former Navy SEAL and the most lethal sniper in American military history, was shot and killed while fulfilling his personal mission, helping fellow combat veterans adjust to life back home. Today is his memorial. Since the shooting, certain opportunists and grandstanders have tried to use this tragedy to further their agenda, namely to portray our veterans as unstable killing machines. And that agenda, unfortunately, is nothing new. In 2008, a series of articles in the New York Times proclaimed that 121 veterans had come home and committed murder. Alarmist NPR segments have since echoed this concern. Trained killers being turned on the loose on the people they're supposed to protect. The idea is truly frightening, but what happens when we take a closer look at the numbers? We'll start with the New York Times stat. 121 veterans committed murder. Now realize that since the beginning of the global war on terror through 2008, 1.8 million American soldiers were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. So let's look at the offending homicide rate for Americans aged 18 to 24 for that same time period, and you see that it's about 25 per 100,000. That translates to about 450 per 1.8 million veterans. Now consider the first homicide statistic, 121 per 1.8 million veterans. This number occurred over the course of 7 years, while the homicide stat represents just 1 year. Pretty obvious that the chances of being killed by a veteran, a professional killer, are way lower than the odds of being killed by a civilian of similar age. And the sad truth is, veterans are much more likely to harm themselves than anyone else. A report released this month by the Department of Veterans Affairs showed that in 2010, there were 22 veteran suicides per day. So why the disconnect? Why are we so concerned with stopping the wars that we're willing to stain the reputations of all soldiers? Are we so horrified by the realities of war that we push our veterans to the margins of society so we don't have to think about them and their sacrifice? Are the military and the VA so underfunded that they're looking for any reason to cut off troubled veterans entirely? And what can concerned citizens do to help rehabilitate veterans and their reputations? Our guest today is going to help us find some answers to those questions. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, former U.S. Army Ranger and West Point psychology professor, is here. He is the nation's #1 trainer of military and law enforcement, and he's been doing it for 15 years. He's written several books on the subject, including On Killing and On Combat. Those two books are the required reading on the required reading list for many military and law enforcement academies, including the U.S. Marine Corps commandants. Dave, welcome.
Hello, Pat.
Great to have you here.
Honored.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for your service. Thanks for what you're doing for our veterans.
My privilege.
Why do you think that our soldiers are being portrayed as unstable?
You know, it is part of a militant pacifist agenda, and unfortunately that's not an oxymoron. To try to paint war as so horrible, so costly, that our nation will never go to war. There are times when we have to go to war. We have to make an educated, informed assessment of the price we pay. But the truth is, Pat, the vast, vast majority of people come home from war as stronger human beings. A new greatest generation is coming home. And the message that I send out on our veterans is hire a vet. Hire a vet. That the primary thing they need from us is jobs. They have discipline. They have a work ethic. They have experience. They have maturity, and special bonus order now. They're far less likely to kill you than a non-vet at the same age. What a deal!
Yes.
Hire a vet.
Yes. Now tell us about PTSD.
Okay.
What is it? And I guess the second part of that would be: are soldiers any more prone to it than anybody else?
Post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of people have post-traumatic stress. For most people, it turns into post-traumatic growth. Very, very common is growth. Romans chapter 5, we glory in tribulation. Nietzsche said, what does not kill me only makes me stronger. The kids who came home from World War II, the greatest generation. Post-traumatic stress is normal. Post-traumatic stress disorder is when dealing with the stress becomes so severe that it creates a significant impact in your ability to function in some important part of your life. Now, it's normal for people to experience all the symptoms of PTSD for a couple of weeks after a traumatic event. We can't call it post-traumatic stress disorder until the symptoms last at least a month. And there are a lot of things that are normal responses, flashbacks, very normal responses. But you got to be warned ahead of time that they might happen.
Are our veterans told that in the beginning? Are they told that when they go?
They have brought me out to train many, many units. The reason why my book on combat is required reading is because that tells them so, and it informs them and it warms them. But across 11 years of war, across 2 million vets, and we haven't necessarily been able to get everybody informed, and they need to know these things. They need to be what I call forewarned and forearmed. They bring me out to train whole battalions, brigades at a shot before they deploy, to make sure that they're warned ahead of time that these things can happen, and to not let these things blindside them.
And are they more susceptible than the rest of the public?
Yes. Our veterans are more likely to have post-traumatic stress because they're more likely to experience trauma. But
if the general public were to have the similar sort of stress or similar sort of trauma, they would experience it just like the military.
They would probably experience it a great deal more.
Yeah, because they haven't been trained, they're not as disciplined, all of those things.
Exactly.
Now, the suicide rates for our veterans are incredibly alarming for veterans and active duty, but they're up for civilians as well. Are there any common threads there?
Yeah, what I need you to understand is I train cops in all 50 states. I train all the feds. I train all our military. And we lose 3 or 4 times more cops to their own hand than we do to criminals every year. We lose more military to their own hand than we do to the enemy in 11 years of war. In both law enforcement and military, the data would tell us that the cops, the soldiers, their suicide rate is the same or maybe a little bit more than the general population. Now, the general population of the same age includes all the unemployed, all the clinically depressed, all the final stage drug users, all the final stage cancer sufferers. For a group of healthy, screened, employed individuals, have the same suicide rate as the general population is definitely cause for concern. But it's important to understand that the suicide rate is no more than, or maybe a little bit more than, it's soft data, than the general population. The military examines every single suicide. They report every single one. In the civilian world, the vast majority, a large portion of suicides don't get investigated, don't get reported. We'll never know. One-car accidents, handgun accidents, was it a suicide? All of us know of cases that fall in that gray area.
Right.
So the military is really giving us a picture of the very high end of the suicide. But similar things are happening in the civilian world. And our suicide rate is up. It is a topic of concern. But again, don't get involved in this overplaying the situation and smearing our veterans as a bunch of homicidal, suicidal individuals. They need our support. They need our help. The primary way that the violence shows up is violence to themselves, but it's not that much more than the general population. But that's scary by itself, and it is up.
It is. When it's 22 per day, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And is that brought on, do you think, is that brought on by the stress of the battlefield and they're still dealing with it, the PTSD sort of symptoms? Is it brought on by the fact that they have taken lives and they're remorseful about that? I mean, do we know why it's a little bit higher?
There's a variety of different dynamics involved. the combat experience, obviously, the stress of it, a nation that has really failed to properly care for our returning warriors. You know, I'll give you one example. I'm a graduate of the British Staff College in 1993 as a young major. We had representatives of every Arab nation there. The Soviet Union has collapsed and they're all democracies. The Warsaw Pact's democracy. Democracy sweeps through that part of the world, except the Arab world. Over a beer every night, over coffee every day, we'd ask our Arab friends, why are there no Arab democracies? And always the same answer. It's our culture. There'll never be an Arab democracy. Arabs won't vote. How do you argue with that? You create an Arab democracy, Iraq, the first Arab democracy the world's ever seen. Sure, it's a mess. Look at our democracy. Every democracy is a mess. Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. But we created a democracy in Iraq. All those purple fingers, millions of Iraqis risked their lives to go vote. How many Americans would risk their lives to go vote? And democracy is contagious. Liberty is contagious. The people next door said, I want that too. I need that too. We don't know how it's going to shake out in Libya. We don't know what's going to happen in Tunisia or Egypt or Syria, but we know where it came from. They call it the Arab Spring, and it came from Iraq. It came from all those purple fingers in Iraq. Will democracy take root in that part of the world? We don't know. But nobody can ever again say Arabs won't vote. They brought the sweet winds of liberty to a distant land. They brought democracy to that part of the world, the Arab Spring. And 10,000 pissants in the media will never give our military credit for doing that.
That's for
They
sure.
kept them off our back. They liberated Iraq, and they created a democracy, and they won. For 11 years, the media has told them, oh, you'll never win in Iraq. Go home, give it up, go away, we're going to lose. And then poof, we won. Where's the parade? Where's the parade? Where's the victory? Where's the, golly, we were wrong, you guys did win, you did establish democracy. So part of it is the politics of the war. Part of it is that in Vietnam, we attacked the returning veteran as villains, baby killers. Today, a similar attack is happening as their victims. They're not victims of an evil presidency, evil war, will pay a terrible price. No, they're not victims and they're not villains. They're our nation's finest. They are 100% wartime volunteers. 4 years into this war, there was nobody left to enlist or re-enlist before the war, got stuck with the war. For the last 7 years of this war, every person in our armed forces raised their right hand to enlist or re-enlist in time of war. The last time we fought a war with 100% wartime volunteers was the American Revolution. It's starting in 1812 when people enlisted before the war, got stuck with the war. For the longer wars, we had the draft. These are our nation's finest. And the primary thing they need is jobs. One of the primary factors is they come home and we have double the unemployment rate of a non-veteran of the same age. And they need jobs, they need support, but they can get trapped in what I call the pity party. If everybody tells you that combat is supposed to spin you out, if you believe that combat is supposed to destroy you, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this whole media smear of our veterans can become a self-fulfilling prophecy that's going to destroy lives. You mentioned the act of killing. Killing is a traumatic act. For those who fully prepare themselves, for those who are killing somebody represents a clear and present danger. But sometimes accidents happen. There is no nation on earth, there is no war in history where we have worked more to make sure that the innocents are not harmed in this war. Sometimes it happens. I've got a couple of photos on standby here I'd like to show you of the American warrior and their role in this war that we should be talking about.
Okay.
We got a bomb going off to the left of screen. We got the soldier striding toward the sound of the guns. We got the little boy with terror in his face. Here's the exact same scene a split second later. As fast as we can click the shutter, here they are.
Oh, wow.
The flock is in full stampede. The soldier is striding toward the sound of the guns. That little boy, he ain't no fool.
Hiding behind the soldier.
He knows cover when he sees it.
Yep.
The American, our enemy, Pat, our enemy will use children as human shields.
Yeah.
The American warrior is a human shield for children. And we have cause to be proud of our warriors. But accidents happen. And some of our guys are deeply eaten up by that. Their goal was noble and honorable. They have done a better job in history. A lot of my cops get in situations which innocents are harmed, and they're devastated by it. Some of our veterans in situations which innocents are harmed. One of the wild cards in the equation is that TBI, the traumatic brain injury. You know, in World War I, they said it was shell shock. They didn't use the word TBI, but they said World War I, it's all shell shock. In World War II, they said, oh no, it's psychological trauma, it's combat fatigue, and we now know that it's both. And the wild card in the equation is the TBI, traumatic brain injury. And what we tell our veterans is we're darn good at treating PTSD. You know, we treat PTSD, and we're good at it. If you were Michael J. Fox with Parkinson's disease, you'd turn the world inside out to find the cure to your disease and get your life back. If you had heart disease or cancer, you'd be turning the world upside down to find the latest medical breakthrough to save your life and get on with your life. If you have PTSD, you should be turning the world inside out to find the latest medical scientific breakthrough. And we're darn good at treating PTSD, and we get better every day. Medical science moves on. So the PTSD side of the house is one, and it's complex enough by itself. We're good at treating it. We get better every day. But for the first time in history, we've begun to realize, wait a minute, it is shell shock, and it is battle fatigue. It's both of them. And the symptoms of TBI are very similar to the symptoms of PTSD.
Now, the TBI, is that similar to what we're hearing about in the NFL with the continual concussion thing?
Exactly.
And we're finding that suicide rate in the NFL, too, from people who have had the traumatic brain injuries, the repeated concussions, and it damages them over time.
Yeah.
Say we're finding the same thing in the military, obviously.
Yeah.
Wow.
And one of the things we're really getting good at as this war goes by, and I tell all of my military I train, don't mess around with this TBI business. Any of you GIs listening to us today, don't mess around. If you get a shot to the head, if you get a blow, a concussion, go to the doc. And if the doc tells you to take a knee for a couple of weeks, do it. You know, it's not that first concussion that does it. The brain swells, you're okay. If you get the second concussion while the brain is swollen, then we really are moving into a realm where you're doing damage.
Is there concern, Dave, among our veterans to keep it to themselves if they have PTSD? Yeah. Because for one thing, they got to be concerned about losing their right to own a firearm with all that's going on.
Yeah. And that's not going to happen. You're not going to lose your right to a firearm, although we got to work darn hard to make sure that is true.
Yeah.
If we say somebody who goes and gets PTSD, and again, remember, our returning veterans are a tenth as likely to commit homicide as a non-veteran of the same age. They are superior members of society. But if we put all this negative connotation on getting a gun, and our veterans like to have weapons, they're good with them, they can be trusted with them. And if you tell them that because they had to get mental treatment, they can't have a gun, time out. So what we need to do is create an environment which it's okay to get help. And we've got to create what I call no pity party, no macho man. Don't go into combat with a pity party. Don't expect it to be a destructive event. Expect combat to be an event that will make you stronger. A new greatest generation coming home. No pity party, but no macho man. If there is a problem, deal with it. And have faith that the help can help. This is so important, to believe in the leaps and bounds of medical technology, to know that you can get better, and have faith that the help can help, and go get help.
You brought up an interesting phrase a few minutes ago. You used the scientific term for media representatives, piss ants. and I'm glad you did, because a lot of the piss ants, to use your scientific term, in the media kind of propagate this theory and this mentality, I think, among our veterans by calling them terrorists, by saying that they terrorize the countryside, as John Kerry did to Vietnam veterans when they came home from Vietnam. Or as Barack Obama even did when he said that we don't need to be continually aerating villages and terrorizing the populace there. And so they play into that, and that can't help whatever they're coming back with.
George Will said that anti-militarism is the anti-Semitism of the left. It is somebody who they have permission to hate, somebody who they have permission to despise. And to a large degree, the left despises our military. They despise what they stand for. They despise their values. They despise what they've created. And they've been undermining our warriors for 11 years of this war, when our warriors need to be upheld and uplifted. They kept the terrorists off our back with their blood and their lives for 11 years. They brought the sweet winds of liberty to a distant land. The primary thing they need is jobs, and our thanks, and our respect, and our support.
We're talking to Dave Grossman. We've got much more coming up on the Glenn Beck program. Welcome back to the Glenn Beck program. We're talking to Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman today about the realities of war and the unique challenges faced by combat soldiers and returning veterans. And Dave, we were talking a little bit during the break about your son, who is currently serving.
He's in Afghanistan. He's a Spec Ops warrior on his 7th combat tour.
7th combat tour.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know, these kids live for the next deployment.
Yeah.
You know, I was in the military. We lived for our next field exercise. They live for the next deployment, and they're so darn good at what they do, Pat.
It's amazing to most of us. It's amazing to most of us who don't want any part of it.
Yeah.
And these guys live to go back.
And they're 100% wartime volunteers.
Yeah.
And none of them been drafted, and none of them been forced for the last 7 years of this war. They make us so doggone proud.
Now, what for those of us who've never served and never will serve, what happens during the course of combat? What happens when you're in the middle of the battle?
There's things that we want to forewarn and forearm people about. The shots get quiet. You know, most hunters know that when you shoot a deer, you usually don't hear the shot, and your ears don't ring. Well, it's no surprise the same thing happens in combat. But how could we have had 500 years of gunpowder combat and not let people know ahead of time the shots will probably get quiet in combat? And we have tunnel vision. Some people say it's like looking through a toilet paper tube. Other people say it's so intense it's like looking through a soda straw. We have slow motion time. We have memory loss. And in one study, half of all trained seasoned cops in gunfights had blackouts, gaps in their memory. And days later, some of those gaps will fill in. 20% of all trained seasoned cops have memory distortions. They just flat remembered things that did not happen. Sometimes little tiny things, sometimes big things. But remember things that did not happen. What's another word for that? Hallucinations. So if you're sitting here right now, boom, tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, slow motion time, autopilot, blackouts, hallucinations, that would scare the daylights out of you all by itself.
It wouldn't. I couldn't do the show.
Amen. And where would we be? The fact that somebody's trying to kill you is bad enough without your body doing weird and wonderful things nobody warned you about. But if you've been warned these things might happen, then they don't blindside you. Well, we want to forewarn and inform people about things that can happen after combat. We kind of expect weird and wonderful things in combat. But after combat, see, when you were a kid, you touched a hot stove, boom. How many times do you have to touch that hot stove? One time.
Just once.
Just once. Unless you're destined to be a paratrooper like me, just once. And you touch that hot stove and a powerful neural network, a network of neurons is established. Well, the same thing happens in combat. And so you'll experience an event afterwards that will set off the memory. And it's normal. It's called flashbacks, and they're normal. By themselves, flashbacks are not PTSD. What happens is, PTSD, when you have a life and death event, you re-experience the event, anxiety or panic attacks or flashbacks, you re-experience the event and you try to not think about the incident. You cannot not think about it. You will literally drive yourself down the path of mental illness trying to not think about it. So you have to be warned that it could happen, and you've got to try to work to de-link the memory from the emotions. And one of the tools we use is the breathing exercise to de-link the memory from the emotions. There's 2 apps written for the breathing exercise that we're training everybody to control that emotion. It's a lot like muscle cramps. You know, we were talking before, one of your folks was saying he was 13 years old, he had woke up in the night with muscle cramps, and he panicked. He called his coach. Coach said, it's normal, here's what you do. Well, you may be in combat, and after combat, all of a sudden, boom, you re-experience the event. Your heart is pounding, something triggers the emotion, and it's okay. Muscle cramps are okay. Usually you know what caused the muscle cramps. Hard workout yesterday, cramping up today. Usually you know what set off the memory, but sometimes you get cramps for no reason whatsoever. Sometimes the memory will come for no reason whatsoever.
When does that usually come? Are you in bed at night?
I'll give you a great example. You hear this story a lot. One veteran told me, he said, I grew up with World War II vets. He's a Vietnam vet. He said, I grew up around World War II vets. I knew World War II vets had combat reflexes. I came home from Vietnam, somebody threw a firecracker, boom, I'm under a car. He said, whoa, I got my combat reflexes. It's a survival mechanism that's normal among veterans. He felt good about it. A young Air Force veteran told me just recently, she said, nobody warned me. Nobody told me it was normal.
Yeah.
She said, I came back, I was downtown with a friend, a car backfires, boom, I'm in the gutter. And I was terrified. I was terrified. Nobody told me it was normal. Nobody warned me it might happen. One cop told me, he said he's a veteran, he'd come home. He said, I was walking, he said, I'm sitting with a bunch of my buddies. We're having a beer, and I told him, I came home, I'm with my family on a sidewalk, car backfires, boom, I'm under a car. He said, I look up, there's my family. It's okay, this is normal. We're warned this might happen. He said, we all laughed. And then he said, one of my buddies said something really important. He said, you know, if we hadn't been warned this might happen, we wouldn't be laughing.
That's for sure. If
we hadn't been warned, we wouldn't be laughing. So it's all about being forewarned and forearmed.
And does that ever go away?
Well, over time it can, and it usually will.
Okay.
Remember, all the symptoms of PTSD are normal for a month.
Yeah.
It's only when they last at least a month, we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. So it tends to fade, and we can help it fade with therapy and the breathing exercise. You know, one little shortcut to the breathing exercise. It's an old counseling trick. It's an old self-therapy trick. It's an old leadership trick. If you start talking about an incident. I don't do therapy. I don't do counseling. But I've had the honor to debrief an awful lot of people immediately after life and death events. As we talk over the event, the moment they begin to lose it, the moment they become emotional, stop and take a drink. And making somebody take a drink is a way of forcing them to breathe. Study what you do when you take a drink. As you're drinking, you breathe in, you hold your breath, you let it out. Mm-hmm. And by simply making somebody stop and take a drink. Or you can go full bore into the breathing exercise and begin the process of delinking the memory from the emotions. And as simple as the breathing, we talk about the two brains, the human brain, the dog brain. You got that puppy inside. And the puppy blows through the screen door, grabs you by the throat and said, gunfight, gunfight, where's the gunfight? So the leash on that puppy is the breathing exercise.
Okay.
And all my veterans, all my cops, I say, here's your homework assignment. Go to Walmart, go to the pharmacy department and take your blood pressure. Most pharmacy departments and Walmart have a blood pressure machine. Do 3 deep, relaxing breaths and take your blood pressure again and look at the difference. While the puppy's just sitting there, tugging on the leash doesn't do much. But just sitting there, you can see a difference. When the puppy takes off, that's when the leash comes in handy. And so for the rest of your life, if the anger's welling up, if the fear is welling up, stop and breathe. And here's the heart of the matter. Controlling fear in combat, controlling fear after combat is the same skill. Just nobody warned you might have to do it.
Now you mentioned these new neural pathways. Are these methods ways to create new neural pathways to stop you from going down that? They're ways to stop you from going down that flashback road, right, and going down a different pathway.
Yeah, yes, quite right. What you're doing is doing alternative neural pathways, in which when you think about the event, instead of thinking about your body coming along for the ride, you delink it from there and you establish new neural pathways over time. And there's a lot of different ways the docs do it. What I tell my guys is no pity party and no macho man. The breathing exercise, delink the memory from the emotions. It's just one trick the doc's got in the bag. The doc's got a whole bag full of tricks. And if you can't leash that puppy in by yourself, there's absolutely no shame in getting help.
Is there any group of veterans from any foreign war that have this experience more often than others? Like Vietnam vets have it more than World War II or vice versa?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we don't really have the kind of data that can give us that kind of information. The Vietnam veterans were condemned and attacked. It really did happen.
Yeah, and it seems like they experienced that. I mean, that's what I think of anyway when I think of flashbacks. I think Vietnam veterans. Yeah,
you know, on movies and television, flashbacks is the wacko veteran hanging out the window shooting everybody.
Yeah.
We've had 2 million Americans in the war zone over a period of 11 years, and not one of them has come home and hung out the window and shot a bunch of people.
Right.
So that's not how flashbacks work. And they scare the daylights out of veterans. They think, oh my goodness, I'm losing control. You're not losing control. All that's happening is those neurons are firing. You don't want them to, just like a muscle cramp. And muscle cramps aren't any fun, but they're nothing to panic about. Having those neurons fire, having those emotions come is nothing to panic about. But controlling fear in combat, controlling fear after combat. By the way, courage on the battlefield is not the absence of fear. Courage is controlling your fear. Mm-hmm. Almost everyone's very afraid in combat.
Sure. Yeah.
But it breaks my heart to see brave warriors, strong warriors, men and women who will be brave in battle, who are blindsided after battle because nobody warned them they might have to be brave after battle.
Unconscionable.
They got to be forewarned and forearmed.
More with Dave Grossman coming up on the Glenn Beck program. Welcome back to the Glenn Beck program. I'm Pat Gray, filling in for Glenn today. With me is Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, expert trainer of military and law enforcement and author of books such as On Killing. And Dave, I know we've talked about On Killing before. Glenn's spoken with you about that, but I'm fascinated by some of the concepts you talk about in the book, such as with these video games. And we just had Nancy Pelosi do an interview where she said that Hollywood has nothing to do with this, with the killing in our culture and all of that. They desperately want to blame it on only guns. Yeah. They desperately want to get rid of guns, and not just assault rifles for my money. They want to get rid of all guns.
It's part of socialism, is to confiscate all the weapons.
Exactly right, and it happens in every socialist society.
Exactly.
So that's part of the agenda, and I think most of the right-thinking Americans know that. And they want nothing to do with Hollywood having anything to do with this problem.
When the truth is, it's just the opposite. Around the world, these horrible crimes are happening. And the video games are the one common denominator in all these crimes. You know, just to kind of come back around to our veterans and the dynamic of killing that we talked about in On Killing, when we realized that to take an 18-year-old kid, send him to a distant land, and make him kill somebody who's never done any harm to him, that's hard. But you know, I had one of these media folks, some wonderful lady, just recently, just last week, she said, well, your book has proven that most of the people who keep a gun in their home won't be able to use it because killing's hard. And if they do use it, there'll be terrible trauma. I said, time out. I said, to send a warrior to distant lands to kill somebody who's never done them any harm, that's tricky, and we got to train them to do it. And this training we use is just like the video games. But we're biologically designed to protect our den. Somebody coming in our house and us shooting.
Big difference.
That mama with that gun, that householder with that gun, number one, that's the kind of violence that's most likely to happen. It's what we're designed to do. And number two, of all the things that could happen, it's the least traumatic that could happen. Now, on a comparative scale, it can be a little traumatic, but not at all like some of the things that happen overseas when you have to kill somebody who was no harm to you. And also, the alternative, if you're using it in self-defense, is to be dead. Right. I can't think of much more, pretty more traumatic than that.
Yes.
So when we talk about the dynamics of studying killing, most of our guys overseas are mature warriors. They're killing somebody who represents a clear and present danger to others. And across the years of all the killing we've done in all the wars, this is the one where there's the least trauma. Now, that's not to diminish anybody's pain. But I've had many people in this war tell me, and I've never heard my World War II vet say it as commonly. I've never heard my Vietnam vet say it. He said, Colonel, I got no problem with killing the bad guys in this war. And I believe him 100%.
The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, they realize that those people represent a clear and present danger to Americans.
Absolutely. And it's very similar then to somebody who comes in your house and violates your home.
Yeah. Because they already have.
Yes.
They already have.
Yeah. That's biologically speaking, as we focus so carefully to make sure exactly the right people die in this war, as we protect the innocent. The American warrior is a human shield for children. It doesn't always work out perfectly. Mistakes happen.
Yeah.
But of all the nations and all the wars ever been fought on this planet, this has got the lowest ratio of innocents harmed, than anything that's ever been done in history.
Oh,
one of the noblest acts in human history is us going to this war and seeking out exactly the right people.
Well, I'll never forget when we started the war and we were bombing bad guys and dropping food to the civilians in the area at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to take care of people as we're trying to get rid of the bad guys. It was an amazing situation. But since we're on the killing thing and how you make people okay with killing the enemy, do you use video game techniques to train our guys to get ready for combat?
Absolutely. Cops and military use very intense, realistic simulators. And all the simulators, the video game industry and the simulator industry are totally interwoven. And they cross-fertilize information all the time. They invest money in each other all the time. And the simulators, my cops know what the simulator does for them. The bad guy does this, boom, they shoot. Mm-hmm. It's a conditioned response. You don't even have to think. It's B.F. Skinner. It's operant conditioning. We systematically, intentionally made killing a conditioned response. And then you've got to be able to live with what you've been trained to do. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the dynamic. But what we do to our military and our law enforcement very carefully with discipline is being done in the video games indiscriminately to kids around the planet. The all-time record juvenile mass murder in human history was when in Germany, a 17-year-old boy murdered 15 all by himself, most of them in his school. The Columbine killers killed 13 between them. This kid killed 15 all by himself. The most horrible gun massacre in history was in Norway. In Norway, that guy got on the island and murdered 69 people, almost all of them kids, 120 wounded. That's the logical outcome of the liberal nirvana when nobody has a gun.
Right.
The criminal will break the law. The all-time record criminal gun massacre in history was on that island in Norway, and it was possible because nobody there could shoot back. The criminal will break the law. The criminal has no problem with killing people. And oh, by the way, study up on it. That guy in Norway talked about how he spent a year training on video games to prepare himself for his crime. He spent a year training on video games. He dropped out of life. He immersed himself totally in violent video games to psychologically, intentionally prepare himself for that horrible crime.
Probably sleep deprived along that same time because he's on video games all the time, which is another issue with
our veterans.
With our veterans.
You know, one of the things, if you got a veteran, if you're a veteran, or if you're in the war zone now, please take care of your sleep.
Yeah.
Take care of your sleep. We know that sleep deprivation is a key factor in our suicides. We know that sleep deprivation is a key factor in our PTSD. And the crazy part is, one of the key causes of sleep deprivation is the video games. There's nothing wrong with adults playing video games, unless it gets in the way of your sleep or it gets in the way of your marriage. And just be conscious of what you're doing with your life. Guard your sleep, protect your sleep. And if you're having trouble sleeping, go to the VA, go to the doc, and get it taken care of. No macho man, no pity party. We come full cycle back around.
Good advice. Nothing wrong with it if you're an adult, unless your wife's name is Jackie and she's yakking at you all the time not to play video games. Then it turns out to be a problem, but I don't know anything about that.
You know, recent research.
That's nothing. We're gonna get back to more of this, Dave, in just a second. Up next, the most effective ways you can help our veterans in need. That's coming up on the Glenn Beck program.
You know.
Welcome back to the Glenn Beck program. I'm Pat Gray for Glenn today, who is attending the funeral of Chris Kyle. We're here with Dave Grossman, and Dave, it's been great to have you here with us today. And we were just talking about sleep deprivation, and you wanted to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, you know, when we talk about what we can do for veterans, make them get that sleep. Take care of that sleep, manage your sleep. Recent research tells us 15% of all divorces, video game addiction is the primary cause. The video game addiction creates sleep deprivation, it creates depression, it's tied in with it. There's nothing wrong with maybe a beer or two as long as you know when to stop. There may be nothing wrong with a couple of hands of poker as long as you know when to stop.
Moderation.
Nothing wrong with video games as long as you know when to stop.
Okay.
So number one is that sleep dynamic is really part of the equation, and it truly is. I mean, 15% of all divorces, Google video games and divorce, the study will come right up. And the younger ages, it's actually quite a bit higher. when you're talking to our son overseas, I get up in the middle of the night and talk to him in the middle of the night. I don't make him get up in the middle of the night and talk to me.
Exactly.
See, their sleep is so important, and being there for them when it's convenient for them is what it's about. The other half of the equation, of course, is we're in the war for 15 years. Don't forget them. Keep sending those care packages. Keep letting them know we care.
Is that the best thing to do for them?
Absolutely. Care for them now like we did on the first year of the war.
Yeah.
Don't lose that passion to support our warriors.
It seems like we have lost that passion.
Thank them for their job. Thank them for what they've done. And the most important thing they need are jobs.
Yeah.
Fight to overcome the liberal smear of our veterans. Those who need help, be there for them. There are some. But the vast, vast majority have been made stronger by war. Believe that, create a self-fulfilling, positive prophecy for our veterans.
Well, I remember growing up, there was always that campaign. I haven't seen it in years, but it always ended, and I still use the phrase today. It was so powerful to me. Don't forget, hire the vet. Do you remember that campaign?
Yes.
It was always on, and it has been drummed into my psyche, and we don't have anything like that now.
Yeah.
So that's a great reminder that, and who better than a vet who's been trained and has the discipline and been trained in so many different things, honorable, good
healthy,
men and
physically
women.
fit,
Yeah.
the best our nation has ever had to offer.
Yep.
There's deep concerns about this generation, but you want to go ahead and find the best and the finest, you get a veteran.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Dave.
My privilege, my honor.
Great to see you.
Thank you for all you do.
When we come back, Glenn will join us on set. He's back from the Chris Kyle Memorial, and will share his thoughts with us next.
I want to thank Pat and Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman for filling in for me tonight. I just returned from Chris Kyle's memorial service at Dallas Cowboys Stadium, and it was pretty remarkable, the amount of heroes that were there. It's a little overwhelming. At one point, I'm standing in the crowd, and a guy comes over and just gives me a hug, and as he walks away, somebody else whispered in my ear, "That's the man who brought down Osama bin Laden." The people that were there, I could only think, I've stood in crowds before where I know everybody's face, and I know the politicians or the Hollywood, and it is nothing like this. Room of people with valor and honor. I attended as someone that just wanted to show their support. I was lucky enough to have this, which put me down on the field. I thought it was interesting that it said Legends Club on it. That puts you down near the family, and his wife was remarkable. She spoke at the end, and she must have been as strong as he was. And she spoke about the children who were there in the front row. I will tell you, I lost my mom when I was 13, and I didn't really understand it at that time. I don't know if anyone really can understand it when you're young. But especially a dad who gave everything, gave his career and gave his life in the end to help others. He was the American sniper, and he gave all of his proceeds away of this book to help other vets. And we are trying to raise money. And tomorrow I will tell you more about the funeral and some of the things that happened. But this is an autograph. This comes from my library. And you'll also, if you'd like to bid on it at glennbeck.com, you'll also get the program and the wristband, a piece of real history. Tomorrow we'll talk about it on the Glenn Beck program. From Dallas, good night.